Juan, we are all yours.
Okay. Hey guys, good morning. Well, I hope you guys got some coffee. I haven't had mine, but I hope you had yours because yeah, it's hard to start work. I know learning and understanding new stuff early in the morning without coffee, at least for me. So today's module it's going to be running your operations. The first thing that I want to do is introduce myself to you guys and let you know a little bit about me. So yeah, my name is Juan Rojas. I've been working in tech for 20 years now. I started my first company when I was 22 um, in Colombia. With that company, I did some business in Latin America, especially Venezuela, Peru. Uh, yeah, we had projects in both of those countries, and then I exit that company like 5 years after. But in the meantime, I also did some, I guided some thesis in my university. By the way, I'm from La Universidad Javeriana. And I also was a certified trainer for Microsoft. So I had the opportunity to help certify a lot of people in back home. Then I work with, when I exit this company, I work with a company from Atlanta, and I did exactly the same. I created a development branch in Colombia for them, and of course, I work on all the not only the hiring process but all the communication process the with Atlanta, all the ways we're going to handle the projects, handle the deliverables, and all those things. After that, I came to Canada, and my I think that my experience in Canada has been, well, I've worked with a lot of companies here, but it has mainly been growth. So I help get, finding those gaps and those problems, and finding those solutions with the right technology. Even though I am a technologist by heart, I don't do tech for tech. I always try to find the best solution for the problem at hand. And thanks to that, in my last job, that is the LCBO, I've been working with a lot of vendor evaluation. And that means the LCBO, being a company as big as it is the biggest retailer of alcohol here in Ontario. And I don't know, I would say maybe Canada. We interface with a lot of vendors. There is a lot of providers of solutions and new technologies that we use. And my lab is in charge of evaluating and seeing if they're ready to engage with us. So I think that some of those key learnings will be in this presentation. So without further ado, let's get on with the chat, with the conversation, and with the training. So what I want to cover today with you guys is how are you going to um, run your operations from Colombia? How are you going to compete with those companies, whether it's in Canada or in the States? How are you going to remain competitive? And how are you going to bridge that gap of the distance and maybe the language and culture barrier, right? So the first, I divided the conversation maybe in two sets. The first set is where we're going to talk about what your business needs and what your company should reflect. And the second part will be how are you going to communicate with your customer, right? And for that, we're going to cover from how are you going to organize better your structure, your organization, determine what are the talent needs that you have or that you need, and identify those gaps and how to fill them quickly and without to incurring into so much expense. Okay, so now the agenda. The agenda is going to be pretty standard. We're going to talk about your team strategy, and how you are going to create that right culture. How are you going to get everybody on that same page? How are you going to have your process of recognition for your people? The second will be how to work with people overseas or with your customers. It's like, how are you going to coordinate those meetings? How are you going to talk about deliverables? What are the communications and what are going to be the technologies and strategies that you're going to use? Then we will talk about customer service and experience. And that means let's try to make to feel your client that they're right next to you, that there is no distance gap, that there is no language gap. Then a little bit about market nuances, and it's understand the communication and technology needs that they have, tariffs, fees and logistics, and it's we're going to learn about the costs, right? The cost that you may incur, license taxes. I know you already covered this, so for me this will be just an overview, that keep it in mind. And lastly, I'm going to just mention how the piece of protect your intellectual property, right? Because we have a full session that Nate will help us with this. So hopefully this will bridge the two conversations. So the first thing that you guys need to think about when you're starting to this new endeavor, new business with a different country, is that your customer needs to understand you, right? It needs to, it's going to get to know you. For so far, well, I know some of you guys have clients in Canada and have clients in the States. Some of you don't. Some of you are still trying to do your first interactions. So how does that look, right? So how do we present ourselves to a new customer? How do we present our business to a new customer? And how do they understand us? And how do they know what we have? So for that, the first thing that I would say is take a look at your org chart. In any new company and any modern company in Canada and in the States has always a way to present their front-facing staff to their possible customers. So that means make sure your org chart is clean, make sure your org chart is up to date, make sure you have backups, make sure you have all these individuals with the language and knowledge to interface with your new customers. The second thing would be work hours. I know it sounds silly and it may be a nuance, but we have 3 different time zones in Canada and the States. 3 different time zones means 3 different sets of times in which you will be working with your customers. So if you're already building or creating maybe a new group inside your organization that will be tasked to work with these individuals, with these new customers, make sure they are going to work on those hours. And why do I say that? Because the less friction that you have, not only in the communication, but also on the outreach with your customers, the better it is for you. And finally, the work on your elevator pitch, right? Uh, Again, you will be starting anew, you will be opening some new business here, and therefore you will have a few key interactions in which you will be able to say, this is what we do, this is the problem that we solve, and this is why you need us. So work on that elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is just, how do you sell me? I know a lot of you may know this, I know you already know this, but how would you sell me your business if we were going in an elevator ride? So try to practice that, very concise, very to the point, and keep it always in hand, because again, every meeting is an opportunity to sell your business. Okay, so first poll of the day would be from this thing that we just discussed. Again, I think that your guys already work with this and is the poll everywhere. So the link is on top, and we were going to discuss which one of these is more important to you: the elevator pitch, a dedicated team for the new market, alignment of your work hours, or up-to-date org chart. And I want to know what you guys think about this. Because I do think, even though there are 4 different very big pieces, and oh wow, that was fast. Is everybody already answered? No? So I know Vivi gives you, I think Vivi gives you like a few minutes before you answer, before you finish. So let me discuss a little bit about this with you. I see that up-to-date org chart is ranking number 4th, right? So I've had this conversation with a lot of our vendors and a lot of the companies that we work on, and it's when we start to work, when we start to discuss about this um, new venture with them, we want to know who we're working with. We want to know uh, what is the staff, because sometimes you start, maybe if it's a solution or even if it's a service, you start working with an individual and you build certain report, and then after a little bit the individual leaves, and then there is a gap in there. So what we always when the org chart, we like to know it. It's because we know, oh, I'm talking to this person, but also this person has a fallback that is another individual. So I know that it will be continuity on my communication with my provider. So that's the big reason for it. So elevator pitch is going up. That's cool. I do think that the elevator pitch it's very needed, even from the introduction. So here I'm going to draw a little bit from my past experience. I work at a lab, and a lot of companies come to us not only trying to pitch us a solution, but also validating their solution. So they want to say, hey, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think my solution would be a good fit for you? And for that, elevator pitch is key, right? It's they come in, we're always busy. So if you can intrigue me or pique my interest in 5 minutes, or it is a good thing for us, because then you start a conversation. They want to know more. We want to know more. We plan maybe a meeting and a demo. So that's very, very necessary. Is anyone missing right now from answering? How fast should we go? Are you still having your first coffee of the morning? No?
That's my second coffee.
Your second coffee? Not too strong, I hope. That's the first thing I discovered when I came to Canada, and is that we don't take coffee that strong back home. I think the coffee that they do here is meant to wake you up no matter what, and the coffee back home is more like a casual drink. Dedicating team for new market also going first. Yeah, having when I've worked with companies, uh, I had the experience with working with companies that in Poland and with companies in India, and it is absolutely good to identify not only the individuals you're going to work with, but to know that you have a team that understands and knows you, right? It's not like, oh yeah, you're part of of our ongoing operations. It's better to say, no, you're part of our outreach clients, so they will always understand your needs. So should we move forward? I think this was a very good one.
Yes. Yes, one you can.
Okay, so next, um, how to work with customers overseas. Overseas. So leverage your current operations and new customer needs in Canada. I'm still admitting people. Okay. So create an SLA plan. We already discussed that, a service level of agreement, and make it public, right? So when you're starting that negotiation, I would say clarity uh, helps you a lot. So if your customer knows when you're available, what is your response time, then he can know what to expect. So I've seen it done it in many different ways. I've seen it done it in things like you get an email back right away to say we will answer you in this amount of time, or in the pre-agreement you say every time you reach to us we will give us 12 hours to answer, but always comply with that, because again, since you're not on the same locale, you're not right there with them, even though we can do the pick up the phone and call you, it's good to know that you know us and that you know that we know what to expect. So creating an SLA is very good. Um, Market knowledge and language. Um, it's we need to be able to speak to our customers in their language, right? We need to. I know everybody speaks English, and that doesn't mean we cannot communicate with our customers. But I'm talking more a little bit about our sales. Maybe our sales, our customer representative, if there is an advantage of having people that are native to uh, this culture and language. And why is that? Because they understand communication, they understand how to the little nuances on the words that they're saying, how to express themselves better, how to sell better. So you need to think about if you want to have teams local or teams from Colombia. Technology strategy. So you need to think about um, what are the tools that you're going to use, right? And what are the tools that are commonly used in this Canadian and American market. Sometimes it new tools that are in use in these markets take a little bit longer to get to Colombia, and therefore uh, there is that little bit of a friction. And again, I'm not talking that it will not work. I'm discussing more about how do we try to be as smooth as possible. So the friction, by not having any friction, you have more opportunities of winning, right? So this is the next poll, and it's I want to talk a little bit while you guys answer. Let's discuss it a little bit. And it's what is your current communication platform? Right? What do you use to communicate with your clients? I think I'm missing a little bit. I think I'm missing Amazon Chime, and I think I'm missing Google Meets in this one. So you can use other for that. But I was trying to go into what it would be a good platform to communicate with my customers, and not only have video and voice, but also text, right? So it is important to have those tools up to date. I have to tell you, like we as LCBO, we use WebEx, and that is limits us in so many ways that last year, because of COVID, we had to do a big leap into Teams and a big team into a big leap into Slack. I do know that Zoom offers now the ability of having a Slack kind of environment in which you can have conversations with your clients. But I also know that even I'm putting them on the same list, they all differ on the offering a little bit. So I know Teams is more for your local, if it's for your organization, and bringing a guest into your organization is a little bit more complicated. I know Slack lets itself more for that. Slack and Zoom are better tools to have external teams and have communication with them. So Slack is Canadian, by the way. So it has taken a lot of flight here in Canada. So let's say having you start your communication with your customer, whether it's their first step or they're trying to test your service or your platform, then you introduce Slack and you create your external channel for them so they know that you're there. They know your SLA now and they can communicate with you. Boom, they know now that you are pretty much right next to them, right? It's a way to have the communication always. WebEx is cool, Skype is cool, but we know WebEx. I use WebEx more for meetings, and Skype it's something that I don't like at all. I would say I think Teams has a way to invite guests, but if I were going to start commerce with a company in the States or in Canada right now, I would use Zoom or Slack as my communication mechanism. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I'm I'm leaving a little chat like what others people are saying that why is not Google Meet here?
Yeah, Google Meet. Google Meet.
Yeah, so that's I know I missed some, but it was more for the conversation's sake. Google Meet is cool for having meetings, right? Google Meet would be similar to WebEx. But if I want to have uh, an environment in which I have a community, let's say, let's give you an example. We're testing a new platform and a new service that a new vendor is giving to us. They gave us access to their Slack and they put us in a specific channel for that pilot. So now I can write stuff there and they will answer there. And I have an environment that is almost live in which I have communication with the vendor uninterrupted. And if we want to, we can jump into a conversation and we can jump into a call. That call can be done with Google Meet if you want, or it can be done on Slack. But again, I don't have to send an email, right? I don't. I know email. It's still the original way of communication, but it's an asynchronous way of communication. So I put a message out, and I don't know when did you receive it, when are you planning to answer it, or any of those things, right? Perfect. Yes, that's so. I put them all together just to foster the conversation, right? But Zoom has that too. Zoom has now the ability to have individuals and rooms and chats and channels. So I would say it all depends on the pricing point in which one would I use, right? Okay. I don't want to take a lot of time from you guys, so let's continue. Um, Customer service and experience. So first of all, training. Train or hire your customer service team. Uh, these people will be your voice, right? So that means they okay, I have wait, sorry to step back for a little bit. I have a last answer. We use the platforms of the clients or Google Meet. That's a very good answer. That's a very good answer, Laura. Thank you for that one. So it means you accommodate your customer, right? You work with them. And that's a two-edged sword, right? Because if your client gives you, of course, we all do whatever is necessary to land a job and to land a project. But if you get into so many things and so many platforms, then it becomes a little bit more cumbersome to pay attention to all of them. So it's almost like a dance, right? That you can negotiate when you talk to your client. If they're not ready, if they're not prepared, if they're not comfortable with any of that, you can have one proposal ready in which you can funnel all your customers, and that helps you a lot. And of course, I know you guys, some of you have products and some of you have services. But if I have a product, then maybe a Slack would be more on online with my offering, because I can talk about new releases, I can talk about new features, I can without having to go one by one with all my customers. So yes, it depends, right? Sorry. Now going back to customer service and experience. So training. When we're going to start these new businesses with our customers, we need to have and to train and hire a good team to enable that communication. Where this team it's should be more than understanding your product or your service back to back. It's very good that they're trained on culture and language. And that means they should be able to communicate properly, and they should be able to understand properly what is happening with your customer. Because a lot of the things that happen are straightforward, but a lot of the things that may also happen are not, are nuances. So if they know the culture, if they know how these customers react, how they like their information, how they like their features, it's also an intake and a filter for you to understand what new things you may be able to do with your customers. Um, Customer focus. What are their problems? They need to success, right? It's like, what are they? Don't when anything that is a problem for them is a possible success case for you, right? It's anything that they haven't solved. It may be a new market for you, a new market opportunity, a new business driver. So having anyone that interface with your client, understanding that, listening all the time, and taking note of the different needs that your customer has will pay out in the end. And the local, and this is a big one. How ready is your product? So when I'm starting to sell my new product to, or my new service to Canada and the States, am I ready to sell it? And what does it mean that? Like, let's, and I'm pointing out just two here. Is it internationalized? It's localized. So and what does that mean? Internationalization means that your software or product can be adapted to any language, right? Without having to go through an engineering cycle. And that means I only need to translate it for you, and I just need the translations, and then it's ready. Localization is that process of translating it to a specific language, and the translation changes. It is I have a dear friend of mine that works in the I-18 business, and the nuances on how things are said, even if your product is, depending on the complexity, how things are said in English in the States and in English in Canada are totally different. It's not only that we use different metric systems or a different currency, it's even the words that we use. So having that also makes your product feel like a local product. So how ready are you? How ready is your product? And what is the gap between what you have right now and what we need in order to attack those new business and these new countries, right? So for this one, I have also a nice little poll, and is how ready is your platform or your service? Are you just localized? Are you internationalized? Are you localized and internationalized? Hasn't started or hasn't planned? I know that you will say like, but what, how can you have localization without internationalization? I do get it, but sometimes people just write a product in English, right? And they say, okay, I have it localized just for this. So what do you guys think? What are you in this process? So I see a lot of you on the hasn't started phase. Um, when we design, it may that you are designing a new product, or it may be that you're selling a new service. I would encourage you to, if it's a service, introduce this process into your overall process. It is important that you cover those nuances from the start. So whenever you're designing and whenever you're executing, it's in the back of your mind, and therefore it becomes natural when you're working with these new customers. Um, with the individuals that are starting to internationalize, make sure that you need to try it out. You need to sometimes what has happened is we went through an internationalization phase for a product, and when we localize it to a different language, everything went out of whack, right? Everything went out of position. The rendering was not okay. It didn't look okay. So we had to go into many redesign phases. So it is always good to test it. It is always good to test it by using a localization example. I think I'm moving very fast. Any questions so far, guys?
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm running through my slides very fast. I think I will have a full conversation. I hope we have a conversation at the end of the talk because I'm going really, really fast. Localize and internationalize for English, French, and Spanish. That is very cool. That is very cool to have your product already uh, ready for that. And may I ask, it's with English, you guys went into the full localization of English US, English Canada, English UK, or just a general English so far? Very cool indeed. Do you want to share a little bit about that experience, Pedro? Like how difficult it was for you guys, or?
In our case, it was not that difficult because since we started our company, we are following international standards. So essentially, most of our platforms, they have different tools like XML files, simple really techniques. So we can use the resources of our customer, for example, in London, when we were working there, and we gave that power to them, so they were working 1 week delivering to us whatever local terminology they want to use, because it changed depending of the province of the city sometimes, as you mentioned. So that flexibility helped us to have a more kind of intuitive experience for them, because they feel that they are using their language. Yeah, so that, I guess, that was a good experience.
So you guys, because you started from the design phase, correct? So you always have that in the back of your heads when you design your product.
Yeah. So what usually happens is that all the platforms that we use in our company, they already have logic to manage this internationalization, because we don't create solutions from scratch. We are more integrators that creating solution for scratch. So that's one of the main points of our solution, is that we need to support these international standards. We need to be prepared to move from one country to the other one in a flexible way. Mm-hmm.
That's a very good success case, and I would like to make a lot of emphasis and for you guys to draw experience from this, because I think it would have been a whole different deal if you didn't have that, right? I think that once a product is cooked, like the way we say it, and once a product is out there, the process of adjusting it to be able to be flexible to different locales, it can be expensive and it could take a lot of time. So starting with that idea, like you guys did, and designing your products like that, saves a lot of time. Even if it's a process, I'm telling you, even if it's a process, having that in the back of your head, if you're selling services, if you're selling outsourcing, making sure your people know about this, they know that they need to include it, they need to be aware of this, it will save you cycles. It will save you gotchas. It will save you things like, oh, we didn't have that in our minds. Now we need to go and do it again. And that's a big delta. Thank you so much for that experience. Anyone else wants to share?
Buenas.
Hola, ¿cómo te fue?
Súper, muy bien.
Okay, let's move on then. So market nuances. So I go back to let's use the right language, improve SEO to get more penetration, use native speakers and people. So this is a quick one, right? And it's more about not only how I have the communication with my customers, but how do I find new business? And the question I ask people is how Googleable are you? Sorry again, I see it's really hard to pronounce. It's how easy is it for me to find you? If I say Colombia outsourcing staff software. Are you on the first, second, third page? If I say game development Colombia, which page are you? So making sure that I can find you and making sure that you're using the right keywords and the right language is good. It's necessary. Pace and cultural differences. Do you and this is I draw a lot of my experience from software. So adapt your cadence to your customer needs. Is your customer more an individual that likes waterfall processes, or more agile, more Scrum? We discuss use the technologies tools that everybody uses, but we touch the communication about with the customer. But what about software to do process management? And that means what do we use to guide a project? How visible are these? How is this a project or a software that it's in use also by your customers? And to quote a few, are you using I don't know, Trello? Are you using Jira? Are you using any of those new softwares that are being used right now for project management? So make sure that you understand their needs and that you are on the same level with them. Understand the culture of your customers, and it's what kind of meeting needs and deliverable needs. So how do they like to do their meetings? I think people have touched on this before, and I always make a lot of emphasis on this one. Canada, in my experience, and America, they like an agenda, they like a plan. Why are we meeting? What are we going to cover? Let's go to the point, let's talk about those things, and then at the end, if we have anything else we can share, or we can just recover the time. Deliverable needs. What is the level of information, documentation, process that they need whenever you're going to do something, right? There is a lot of conversation happening, not only about I like the product or the service you're giving me, but also what is it coming with. It comes with a good documentation, it comes with a good information set, it comes with a lot of support. How does that work? Let me know. And the local competitors, right? And what does it mean, local competitors? So when you're doing your gap analysis, when you're benchmarking your service or product against these ones in whatever you're going to tackle, because and that's also interesting, right? When I'm tackling Canada, I'm tackling Ontario. It could be that there is a provider for that product and service in Ontario, and there is a different provider in Quebec and a different provider in Vancouver, because these provinces are so big, right, that there is a lot of business for everybody. So make sure you find which are your main competitors in that locale, in that specific region that you're trying to target, and then check it out, figure it out which piece of that market you want to tackle. Maybe talk to them. There is always a possibility of partnering it up. I would say if that exists and if that's possible, that's always a good alternative and a good way to get into a market without having a lot of exposure and risk, because you've seen so far that you need to well, you don't need to, but it's good if you establish an organization and a team, and if you sum all of those things up, it's a lot of stuff that you have to do. So if you have a partner here that will enable you and also represent you in the right way, because you need that representation, you need that reputation, then partnering may be a good idea for you, right? And hire the right talent is the last thing. And for me, hiring the right talent doesn't mean go on and source the most expensive individual for every task. It's get the effort on what is the things you need, what are your specific needs of individuals, and fill those gaps, whether it's with and it doesn't mean oh, I need to go and get a whole team of freelancers and full timers. No, COVID did a lot for us, and there is a lot of freelancing people doing good work right now. So find those gaps, hire that talent, and if that talent is local, it's even better for you. One case and one success story that we've seen so far is that there is a lot of Latin American individuals living in these two countries. So having a Latin American with the skill set that you guys are looking may be a good bridge because they understand your culture, but also the culture of the country that they're in, and they will help you fill that gap, right? If I'm hiring someone that is native in that country, they may not know what are the differences and what are the nuances between us. But if I have someone that already lived the experience, that could give me a leg up on moving me faster. So always keep that in mind. Uh, Finally, I want to talk about
We have a question on the chat.
Oh, sorry. Give me a second. Back. Okay. If a company works in the Scrum framework and the client is used to working waterfall, do you have any advice for the guys in charge of closing the gap in the middle ground? Yeah. So this is this is us pretty much. You're talking about my company right now. So my company likes to go waterfall, and everybody that is trying to move fast, it will be on some sort of agile scrum methodology. So I would say there is a marriage between the two by saying you can hijack the waterfall process by working on milestones. So you can say, okay, well, the product will be delivered in your 6 month up to a year period, but let's nail it down to milestone, and those milestones can align a little bit better with your agile structure. So it is just a dance, right? I think that both things tend to be different ways of tackle the problem, but it's always about communication. I think that the one thing that I would suggest is trying not to force it. Right, that's the big thing. Is just uh, it's finding that middle ground. So what do you think about if we do deliverables and we match those deliverables with payments? Or if we put some milestones in and those milestones go into a bigger milestone that is the deliverable of the process. So you can do some magic there, because I wouldn't recommend just to wait the whole waterfall process in order to make a deliverable, right? Or even you can maybe negotiate to for your customer to also give you maybe they can put a little team to work with you that understands it and that would be willing to work in that way. Just be mindful of that. I think it's just your ins and outs, and once you figure out a way of naming them without entering into a conflict, especially if they are so hardcore in terms of what methodology they like, then you can negotiate a lot. Any other question? No. Oh, it's two different ways to tackle problems. Just that one is right. Yeah, I know it's everybody has a different set of expectations, right? And waterfall, it's kind of still there. Don't believe it or not, it's still there. There's some big companies doing big iterations with a lot on the line for them. But little by little, I think that we're going to is a hybrid model of big milestones and little steps. Yeah, exactly, Pedro. Just negotiate, dude. That's I would say in those conflicts or those friction pieces that you may find, it's always about discussing and working around the language. So I would never, not would never, but I wouldn't present myself as yeah, we're an agile team. Blah, blah, blah. I would say we're a team that enable customers to do this, and we understand and we adapt to your needs. So once they say, oh yeah, but I'm waterfall, and what do you guys think about that? You would say, yeah, but do you have milestones? And then you start negotiating, and then you don't go into the specifics of the language. I know that it could happen that both companies, and again, I am drawing from my experience, maybe software and maybe both companies want to understand each other in the same context. But then again, it's just about, like you just said, expressing it in terms of we're oriented to a more of a linear, faster cadence, but we are able to adjust that to your cadence if it needs to be, right? So it would be that. Okay, thank you, and let's keep going. Okay, yeah, operational costs. Operational costs in the target country. Uh, Again, I mentioned a few things like hiring your customer service team in the region. I mentioned something about how do you would put, and I think in your previous sessions you've discussed how do you start your business in this region, being physically here. But I wouldn't start from the get-go like that, right? I wouldn't, because that's kind of a huge investment. I would try to go with start small and grow, partner up, look for fillers, and that means start to have those conversations and start to get recommendations before you make any big decision, and just start gathering that information and create your budget, because you once you negotiate and once you have enough conversations and once you have enough customers that are interested in your product, and once you done your due diligence, you will have a budget on what are the real costs to do businesses in that country. So find out what is the best thing for you at that moment, but having a budget and a plan will always help put your clients at ease, because your clients will say like, yeah, we can hire you, but you're in Colombia, so what's your plan? What is your 5-year strategy? And well, maybe not 5-year, 1 year strategy. And then if you have that, right, if you say yes, we know that right now we're in Colombia, but this is our plan, we're moving into these stages, as soon as we cover this and these milestones, then believe me, if again the mentality of a customer that is finding things in Latin America may differ between different factors like cost or acceptance of risk. But if they're on that boat with you, having that clarity of what is your plan would also make them feel more comfortable working with you, right? It's like, oh, now I know where these guys are going. Now I'm invested in their success. So doing that due diligence, doing that homework, and not only reaching to customers and trying to find new places to do business, but also understanding what would entail and what would be the plan to set a foreign office in that place also helps a lot. And this is, I'm not talking about a lot of intellectual property, because Nate will cover it, but it's I just wanted to mention three little things, and then I know Nate will go into a deep dive with it. But it's an NDA, right? Anything in this country doesn't happen if you don't have an NDA. So having a boilerplate NDA covers you in terms of what you can. Once you have an NDA, you can start talking about the things you seek, not your secret sauce, but talking about a little bit more about your process or project or product, and we can have a better conversation with our customers without fearing that our know-how or a special sauce is going to be stolen. If it's a patentable product, then knowing about it, reviewing the process, and knowing the steps on how to get there would be good for you. And the last thing is share just enough, right? So when I'm starting my conversation, if I have a new product and or I have a new process that it's going to be maybe disruptive in the marketplace, it is important to share just enough, and that means uh, I am proud of my product, but I'm going to give you a taste of it. I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to get you excited. But not because of that, I'm going to open the doors to tell you this is my product. Just take it, check it, use it. because they may copy it, right? There is I've been through the experience. I cannot tell you which company, but I was working for X company, and a big one of a Y company, one of those cloud providers, came to us and said, "You know what, guys? We want to buy you out, but we want to see your product. Can we take a look?" And they took like a month, and the first was like, yeah, we want just a user, and we and they navigated the product, and then they said, but we're not sure about the security. Can we do some things with your security? And when that happened, we had some issues, and they said, let us look at the code, and we let you know if anything's wrong with it. And a month later they say, you know what, thank you, but no thank you, we don't want your product. And 6 months later they have a special new little beta product that was very similar to ours. So make sure make sure that always have that mentality of we shared just enough, because good ideas that can be copied will be copied, right? And I think
And
for
protect your information, and that's why we have the cybersecurity module going
Yeah, well, I didn't
going
want to
on.
go. Yeah, I didn't want to go on that one. I didn't want to mention anything because it's going to be very exciting. Nate has a lot of experience in this area, and I know you guys will enjoy a lot this new conversation. F- Before we close and we go into the 5 minute break, any comments, any questions? You guys got your coffee?
I have a question, Juan, for you. This is Pedro.
Hey, but yeah.
Yeah, it's intellectual property. Let's say it's something that can be in two different scenarios. You describe one, which is kind of the traditional scenario with closet knowledge, let's say. So I want to protect my knowledge. I want to have everything under a patent or something like that. There is another road, and maybe that's our road, which is collaborative innovation with everything is open. So when you are participating in communities of innovation in different countries, with everyone is sharing their knowledge, and the real value is in the consulting services. So that's what our business is about. So one of the challenges in the Canadian market in the past is that they were not kind of open to this model, sometimes because they are conservative and they prefer to have a company that is giving all these closed solutions with all this private stuff, still having in mind that might be a bit expensive. But now that the budgets are more limited, now that we have to work remotely, now that we have a lot of restrictions, I'm just curious, how open is the Canadian market to these collaborative innovation projects where you want to reuse, where you want to share the knowledge, when it's a kind of different perspective. So just want to know what is your perspective, your experience in that area currently, for example, I don't know, in Ontario, to be really specific.
So this really hits me hard, right? Because that's exact. You're describing my company. So I know maybe you know the LCBO. The LCBO, to give you guys some context, is a company that's been doing business for 100 years, and we are in Canada, in Ontario. Alcohol is not. You cannot buy it anywhere. The only way you can buy it is in these stores that are owned by the LCBO, and the LCBO is a company that is part private, part government, right? No, I think it's all government. It's just that they keep the money. Yeah. So they've always been exactly like that. They'll always look for what is we call that the silver bullet. And is I don't want to think about it. Just sell me the solution, and I will use your solution and pay you through my nose. But I just want it to work. Funny enough, thanks to COVID, a lot of things change pretty quickly. We before we couldn't check our emails in our phones, and now we can. Before Teams was too expensive, and suddenly it's affordable. Before solutions that we were looking for were like a silver bullet, and now we're entertaining more vendors that are mid to small size. So it has changed a lot of the mentality. You're absolutely right. The American wants to take the risk. The American wants to move faster no matter what. The Canadian is more unsure about it, and risk is something that they don't enjoy and they don't thrive a lot, especially in Ontario. So I think it's a matter of angle, and we've seen that the waves is been working. It's a lot knocking a lot of doors, but also finding the right sponsor. Finding the right sponsor. If you manage to find that link to that individual that is trying to push for change in that organization, that's your guy. That's your stakeholder, your sponsor, your guy into that market and into that business. So it's always like all my company, everybody in my organization, they don't enjoy it, but my CIO, it's an individual that is pushing for change. So if we manage to sell to that guy, then we get it done. So in my only advice would be, in order to find that collaborative spirit, it's also find the company, and inside the company find the right individual that has the amount of leverage, power, and willingness to take the risk, right? But it's don't try to change them or use them just as a platform to test your ideas. And that's why a lot of people approach us as a lab instead of approaching the LCBO directly, right? Because us as a lab have an open mindset of telling them what your idea, it's very cool, it may work, but the LCBO will not work with you because this of this of and that reason. So I would say it's more of a, or it has a little bit more work, but I've seen it. I'm seeing it change. I'm seeing it change, and it's changing pretty fast. I think that we need to seize this opportunity before people go back to and retract a little bit again. But I'm seeing a lot of willingness to work, especially in 2021. 2020 was a year in which people didn't want companies didn't want to go into anything because we weren't sure of everything. But now, at the start of 2021, we see this new wave of possibilities thanks to remote, and I would say before we get back to normal, or some kind of normal, once we have vaccines and all that, I think there is a good way, a good few months to establish yourself into this market. Thank you for that question. Very good question. So for that, guys, now I think we will have a 5-minute break, and then Nate will start talking about all these things about cybersecurity and intellectual property. Cool.
Sure. Maybe, Juan, before we go on break, I can just add a little bit to what you just said about
Yes.
collaborative initiatives. If you don't mind.
Thanks, Nate.
So I think there's a growing movement in Canada. Pedro, you were asking about collaborative projects and working on essentially open source projects. And traditionally, Canadian businesses have tended to favor closed source solutions that are proprietary, because everything is owned by the vendor, and so all the risk is transferred to the vendor, and they can put very strict conditions on what the expectation of the vendor is, because the vendor owns the entire thing end to end. Increasingly, though, we're seeing a transition from closed source models to open source models, where the vendor can, or your business can then profit, rather than licensing out the software, you profit from integrating the software, and people have access to it for free. There's a couple of factors driving that shift towards open source software. One of them is decreasing vendor tie-in. So the World Economic Forum just wrapped up. In their slide deck about the transformation of the financial industry, for instance, one of the biggest bullet points was transition to open source software, so that if your vendor goes offline, you still have access to that software. So I would say in Canada, that mentality is really starting to loosen up. And in my previous job, we were at Gorilla Group, we were almost exclusively working with open source software that we then integrated for e-commerce sites. There is a big market. What I would say, though, if you're going down the open source route, is be very careful with your licensing in the Canadian and American market. There are a number of open source licenses which can allow you to do very different things. I can send those out if you want, but based on the licensing of your product, you could have someone basically replicate it and sell it for commercial reasons, or you can refuse all changes, or you can build a really thriving community of developers around that product that are going to help you innovate, find issues with it, develop new features. And as a vendor, that becomes very attractive because all of a sudden, rather than having a huge development team pushing product features and bugs, you can have a small core of engineers and then a larger open source community that's pushing your product to market. One good example of this is the Magento software, which was initially developed by eBay. It's an e-commerce platform, and they've embraced a hybrid model where it's both open sourced and freemium, essentially. So you have a base community platform that's maintained by a thriving community of developers that's integrated by a whole bunch of different merchants. A lot of the e-commerce sites that you visit are going to be running on the Magento software. And then for a number of advanced features and functionality like advanced analytics, then they have that added license layer. And for support models and integration models and all that, that's where they make their money. So open source, going back to the original point, is a growing community in Canada, and that business mindset that you're describing is really starting to shift and pick up steam.
Okay, thank you for your feedback, Nate. I take note about that. It's a great feedback, and maybe I will be in touch later on with you because you seem to be really familiar with the local environment for the open source.
Sure,
initiative.
yeah.
Thank you.
I'll post the licenses for open source in chat so that you can look at them and see kind of the descriptions of what the licenses are to release your software under.
Brilliant.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nate. So now we will take a 5-minute break, guys, and then Nate, it will be all on you, I guess.
All right. I'm going to give it one more minute. Please start raising your hands if you are back. Thank you, Santiago. Pedro, Charlie, Gabriel. All right. We're getting in. We had some before, Andrea, and I guess other people are also online. I guess, Nate, we are all yours. You can start. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, my pleasure. Let me get the right window here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, cybersecurity. So as you enter a new market, it's important to understand the implications of that. And cybersecurity is an increasingly important topic in Canada. So we're going to be talking a little bit about why people get breached, what the incentive to breach is, and what you could do to prevent that from happening. A little bit about me. So I've been in the tech sector for 10 years. 5 of those years I spent in Montreal at a company called Gorilla Group, first as engineering manager overseeing development, primarily for e-commerce software, and then as head of operations and security, where I oversaw our Canadian presence as a company, because Gorilla Group was and still is an American company. And then also head of operations, that was overseeing the Canadian operations, and head of security, I built out a cybersecurity consulting department. And essentially what we did is a company, primarily Fortune 500 companies, in securing their systems and their organizations. So the core of the business was building large-scale e-commerce solutions. And as you know, security is a huge component of e-commerce. So building out that core expertise within the organization that can help address some of the security concerns of our clients. And then back in 2020, actually last year, it's very recent still, we were acquired by Wunderman Thompson, which is WPP, the largest ad company in the world. And I took that as my opportunity to transition away from Gorilla Group, because as much as I love the tech and the security, being part of an 80,000 person ad company is not what I signed up for. So That was a great bit of fun. I still have a lot of good friends over there. A great company if you're entering the Canadian market, by the way, to be in touch with. Currently working as lead security officer for Salaries Bank here in Germany, which is why this call is so early. So I do appreciate everyone waking up early to hear this, and hopefully I can make it worth your while to have had 3 coffees before 9 a.m. even started. And right now what I'm really focused on is the digital assets. So we're building out a cryptocurrency custody platform where people can store their cryptocurrency and trade different cryptocurrencies. As you know, cryptocurrency security is a tricky business, so they brought me in to build that product out and implement it. My list of side projects is many, but one of the ones that I'm very proud of is building out the National Anti-Corruption Reporting Dashboard for the government of Ghana. So I've worked with a variety of public and private sector organizations in parallel to my professional career. The government of Ghana was one where basically I digitized their anti-corruption data reporting software. Still going strong after 3 years. I was just on the call with them earlier today. Very good bit of fun. But enough about me. Let's talk about security. So 3 parts to this. First part, we're going to be talking about the incentive to hack. People often talk about, why people got breached, what mechanisms were in place, what mechanisms were lacking, but rarely do people talk about what's the key motivator for people, for hackers, to attack your websites. And I think that's a really core part of securing yourself, is understanding what value you have and why people go after that value. Then we'll talk about the impact of the breach. So what happens to Canadian companies when they do get breached? What's the cost? What are some examples? And how does that cost break down, right? And then lastly, we'll be talking about preparing for a breach, or avoiding a breach. So defining a budget, securing your product, securing your organization, getting certified, and ensuring that the impact of any security-related event is minimized so that it doesn't negatively impact your business. Not just, it's not all negative, of course. We'll also be talking about how security can drive trust in your customers, help you acquire large companies as clients in Canada. So the sooner you prioritize security, ideally, the better you are positioned to enter into this Canadian market that's increasingly wary of security implications. 3 big sections. After each section, I'll take a couple of minutes for questions in case there are any. And of course, at the end, there's an open Q&A session. So strap in. Let's talk about the incentive to hack. So, of course, obligatory first slide. What is a breach? Very straightforward stuff. The sample definition would be the unauthorized access, use, or disclosure of data resulting in a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Very high level. Basically, someone doing something you did not want them to do with your data or your systems. And some examples, which we'll be running through, is loss of customer or employee personal identifiable information, PII. That term in Canada is very, very common, and people are going to be focused on how do you secure your PII. That includes customer health data, customer financial data, employment information, essentially anything that can tie, any piece of information that can tie and identify an individual, whether it's a customer or an employee or a partner or whatever, like credit card numbers or first and last names, addresses, social insurance number. All of that falls under the broader umbrella of PII, personal identifiable information. Second example would be the loss of intellectual property, which Juan talked about in the previous segment. So theft of proprietary software, theft of customer lists so that people can go after your customers, theft of installation details. What do your facilities look like? Of course, that's specific to certain industries. But if you're working in a highly secured organization like a bank, the details of how your installations are in Canada are, of course, protected. And then unauthorized software modifications, so introducing malware. Cryptojacking was a very fun example. Basically, injecting software that runs on people's browsers that mines cryptocurrency for you, and then you can reap in the benefits. Not as common as it was a year or two ago, but always a fun example. Adding your server to a botnet, so injecting malware into your servers that can then use that server to attack someone else, and then obviously putting malware in place to steal PII recurringly. And if I'm insisting on personal information throughout this presentation, it's because worldwide, 80% of all breaches were for personal identifiable information. And we'll talk a little bit about why. So oftentimes in the news, you'll hear about the loss of intellectual property or ransomware where people's computers and data get encrypted and they have to pay to get it back. And those are really, really important examples. But overwhelmingly, what we're seeing is people getting attacked for their customer information, credit card details, social insurance numbers. And why do hackers do this? Because there's a market for it. So some of you may have heard of something called the Silk Road, which back in, geez, it must have been 2012, 13, was this online marketplace for all of the vices you could imagine on the dark web. It got shut down by the FBI. Very interesting case. It was one of the first marketplaces for illicit goods on the dark web. And now what we're seeing is there's a whole bunch of these peer-to-peer networks of people exchanging informations. I have here the example of Nightmare, which is one such marketplace, one of many now. So you can see this is a full-service e-commerce store that puts even Amazon to shame. You can buy goods such as fraud, so PII, guides and tutorials on how to do a whole bunch of nasty things, counterfeiting services, malware, intellectual property, and you buy all of that or sell all of that for cryptocurrency that you then launder into fiat money, into euros, Canadian dollars, what have you. And what's interesting about this is that all data has a price, whether it's proprietary software, tutorials on how to hack, pieces of malware, or that personal information. These marketplaces are thriving, and we'll talk a little bit about how big of a market this is. But essentially, if you as a hacker can steal something from someone else, there will be a market for that. And that's really what's driving these attackers to focus on hacking companies. So market size, I don't want to scare anyone, right? The percentage of cryptocurrency used in these is rather minimal. It's 2020, it was under 1%, but it is consistent and it is on the rise. So in the top chart, we can see here the share of cryptocurrency volume that is illicit, which means used for illegal activities. And you can see that the market is huge. It's between 2.5 billion and 12.5 billion US dollars every year for buying and selling information, malware, and all that kind of stuff. And then you can see kind of how it breaks down, which categories breaks down. So darknet marketplaces are a very big portion of that. Scams are a portion of that. Stolen funds, terrorism financing, ransomware, all that good stuff. So these darknet marketplaces, they're not regulated. They're geographically distributed, and they're going to stay. There's no way to get rid of them entirely. And because of just the sheer volume that they process every year, 5 billion, there's always going to be someone willing to spin a new one up. And this is just a part of life nowadays, right? It's the reality of doing business in the modern world, in the digital age. For all the good guys, for all 100 good people on this earth, there's always going to be one bad person. So there's always going to be someone willing to bend the rules to their advantage. And this is essentially how they sell that data. And again, we could talk a little bit about this. So what I always find interesting is trying to contrast the salaries that technically minded individuals are making, and then the amount of money that they can make through illicit means. So This is on the right, we can see the average software developer salaries in the US, obviously the highest salary bracket in the world, 106,000. In France, a little bit less at 40,000. And then when you get into markets like India, you'll get people making a fraction of that, right? So these are developer salaries, people that are technically minded, that know how software works, that know how to interact and secure with software. They're making this amount of money. But then on the flip side, they have this huge incentive to breach. So credit card details, for instance, averaged $8 Canadian per record on the black market in 2019. So if I have your credit card information, I could sell it for $8 Canadian. And then if I have your full identity, banking, or health, that could be upwards of $100. And that may not seem like a lot for one piece of information, but the average breach includes over 25,000 records. So very quickly, you can see this imbalance where the average breach nets an attacker, let's say 200,000 Canadian, maybe it takes them a week's worth of time. And on the flip side, they're only making, let's say, 15 to 40,000 a year. And that really drives this group of individuals to do what they're doing, because hacking is an order of magnitude more lucrative than development work. And not all countries prosecute hackers. So Canadian hackers, Dutch hackers, German hackers, maybe Colombian hackers will be prosecuted by authorities. But if you're working out of Malaysia or Eastern Russia or Mongolia, the authorities may not come after you. So you remove that risk factor for being on the offensive. And so that's why we see this huge incentive on behalf of the attackers. And again, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just trying to paint a picture of what the industry looks like and why people do these things that they do, right? Everyone has a motivator in the world.
Nate, we have a question from Pedro.
Of course.
So Pedro, do you have your hand raised? Do you want to ask a question or?
No, my mistake. I guess that it was there since we started. Yeah.
It's okay. Okay, all good. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. So just to recap this little segment, just to give you a little taste of it, in Canada and across the world, all data has a price. And the market for illegally acquired data is booming. There's very strong financial incentives to hack, and it's a geographically distributed threat. So it's going to be a persistent problem, and it's something that we just need to live with, right? It's part of our daily reality, just like we have to deal with the government when we're filing our income tax every year. We have to deal with these hackers as they're trying to breach our systems every year. So before I move on to the next segment, do we have any questions about what we talked about a little bit? Incentives, market, all that kind of stuff? Charlie says, I guess it's time to pivot. To pivot away from what? I'm sure we'll get an answer to that soon. To pivot? No, Charlie. Okay, just to be clear, I'm not advocating anyone do anything illegal. It's a very, very bad idea. I'm just saying the incentives are there. No, Charlie, you misunderstand what I was trying to say. All right, off to the next section if we're good. So the impact of a breach. Now we've talked a little bit about Charlie's future career. We could talk about what it looks like to be on the receiving end of this for a company in Canada. So the average cost of a breach for Canadian companies is $4.5 million, which is a lot of money. And you can see that this is the average across all organizations, big and small. And you can see this breakdown here of the total cost of a data breach by country or region. And you can see, obviously, number one, the United States is the most expensive country to suffer a breach in, averaging $8.6 million. Middle East is second, although that data was a little bit skewed because of the attacks on the oil industry. Canada is typically between second and third. This information is from 2020. So in 2020, Canada was the third most expensive market to suffer a breach in, In 2019, it was the second, and expectations are that in 2021, it'll be second as well. And you can see someone jumping in. Okay, I think someone just unmuted themselves. Oh, Diego just joined. Welcome, Diego. We were talking about the cost of a data breach by region in 2020. So this is a huge difference that you're going to be experiencing, because in Latin America, the average cost of a data breach is a third of what it is in Canada. And those financial repercussions, which we'll talk about a little bit more, can really cripple businesses looking to expand in a market. You know, a lot of businesses that are starting up in Canada just don't have the amount of capital required to deal with these kind of security events. And ironically, they don't have enough capital to build out the measures to prevent them either. So it can really cripple small and medium business growth in the Canadian market. And again, going back to our discussion from earlier about what the types of breaches are, we see that overwhelmingly 80% of data breaches across the world target customer information. And we talked about what that could be: health information, credit card, all that kind of stuff. 32% of those target your intellectual property, your software, how you do business, your client lists. 24% anonymized customer data, 23% other corporate data, and then your employee data, 21%. Also a market depending on how many employees you have. All right. So again, not trying to scare anyone, right? We're just walking through this. We'll talk about how to avoid this in a second. But here's we talked about the different record types that could get compromised. This is the average cost to the person being attacked per record type. So if you lose a single customer's information, it'll cost you on average $175 US to take all the steps required and to do everything that you need to, which we'll talk about later. So the cost per record lost for customer PII is $175, the highest you could possibly get. Intellectual property is also quite expensive at $151, and other corporate data is a little bit less expensive at $150. And this is at the forefront of everyone's mind in Canada because we've had some big ones. In 2019, you'll hear this all the time. There was Desjardins, one of the biggest banks in Montreal, Caisse des Dépôts technically. They lost 9.5 million records. Essentially, everyone in the province of Quebec was impacted by this, either directly or indirectly. And that cost them over $100 million to remediate, just direct costs, no indirect costs of lost business or whatnot. So Desjardins has become the biggest example in Canada of a breach. It's still very recent, and it happened in my hometown of Montreal, so everyone's still talking about it. 2019, Life Labs lost another 85,000 records, cost them up to $1 billion in direct costs, class action lawsuits, and everything. And then the government themselves are not exempt. In 2019, Revenu Québec, our revenue agency, essentially our tax agency in Quebec, lost another 23,000 records. And of course, because it's a government, they don't need to disclose how much money they lost because it's all part of their budget, so the costs are unknown. These are just a couple of small examples, but these things happen all the time, right? It's just part of doing business. And then we'll talk a little bit about the different sizes of companies. So based on my previous examples, I just want to highlight that this impacts large and small companies equally. So on the right-hand side, you can see that large companies with more than 25,000 people, which won't be represented in this call, have an average breach price of, in 2020, 4.2 million, whereas the smaller companies have a smaller cost, but proportionally impacts them far more, right? A company with less than 500 people averages cost of 2.3 million if they suffer a breach. And for a company less than 500 people, that's crippling. For a company that's more than 25,000 people, 4.2 million, that won't even make them blink, right? So it's very important for small and medium businesses to really focus on this topic early. So what is the impact of a breach? It's obviously divided into multiple different categories. There's the obvious stuff, the business disruption. So If you have, for instance, a product and you suffer a breach, you'll have application downtime. People won't be able to access your website. You'll have disruptions to your processes as people scramble to try and figure out how to address it. Then you have, as you're suffering from this business disruption, you've got increased costs. So you've got customers that can make claims in Canada. They can say, you mishandled my data. I need you to give me money for that. And the legal system is typically in favor of those customer claims against businesses. You also have remediation costs. If you don't have that expertise in-house, you have to bring in an external contractor. And as you know, people tend to up their prices when there's an urgent need. So those external security contractors are not going to hesitate to charge you top dollar for remediation. And then there's lost business, which is the biggest cost. So you have to notify all of your customers. Legally, you have to inform your customers when you're breached. And that comes with a ton of reputational damages, not just for your current customer base that may decide that they want to put their information with someone else, but also reputational damage for future business. So future customers may look at you and say, hey, well, they mishandled data in the past. Do I want to give them my data today? And this is kind of how it breaks down. So the graph on the right, we can see the breakdown in cost in millions of US dollars for these different categories. So detection and escalation, what happens at the beginning? Oh, I've been breached. I need to notify people. I need to fix my systems, all this kind of stuff. That's about 28%, let's say 30% of all costs associated to it. Ex post response, making sure that this never happens again, that's another 25%. Notification, contacting all of your customers, tracking them down, getting legal involved because lawyers are the ones who kind of draft this stuff. That's about 5%. And the biggest impact is lost business at 40%. So the overwhelmingly, the largest cost center in the impact in the context of a breach is going to be the loss of current and future business. And just a little example here. So according to BNN Bloomberg, 84% of Canadians rethink a relationship after a breach has happened. And that kind of gives you an idea for the mindset. People don't take these things lightly. At least they don't anymore. People used to be a lot more forgiving with this kind of stuff. So we've talked about all the horrors of this world. And again, not to scare anyone, because this is all stuff just part of doing business. And it's stuff that we can address, stuff that we can prepare for, and stuff that we can minimize. So before I move on to preparing for a breach, does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts? All right, unfortunately, I guess Charlie's already gone. He's Googling how to be a hacker. So we don't have any further questions at this moment. All right, so the first thing you need to do is define a budget. Figure out how much money you can spend and invest into this. And when you're talking about budget, a lot of people are going to say, invest as much as you can into this. The only appropriate response for a security budget, it should be just enough. You should never overspend on security. You should always invest into security, make sure that things are secure, but you shouldn't invest more than the data is actually worth. You know, we can't make a perfectly secure system. So figure out what your loss expectancy is. In the event of a breach, how much would it cost you? Would it cost you 100,000? Would it cost you 5,000? Would it cost you 5 million? And figure that out by looking at these numbers, looking at the reports out there and figuring out what your exposure is, right? And then break that down to your annualized loss expectancy. Based on the rate of occurrence of this event, how often do people get hacked? Maybe once every 3 years. So if I'm expecting 100,000 in losses if I get breached, and I expect to get breached every 3 years, then my maximum security budget should be $30,000 invested into it. Of course, it's very subjective, but at least it'll give you a baseline of how to start this conversation, how to start building a budget, and how to start building a practice around this. Secure your products. So there's this is a huge topic in and of itself, which we could go into as we needed to, but there's something called a secure software development lifecycle in SSDLC. Microsoft has this great 8-step process to get your product secure. There's a ton of resources out there. And not everything is going to fit your use case. So for instance, Microsoft suggests regular training programs, strict requirements, metrics and compliance reporting, using software composition analysis to find vulnerabilities in your software, perform threat modeling to figure out how can people really mess with your systems, using tools and automation to find those vulnerabilities after it's been deployed, keeping credentials safe, and using continuous learning and monitoring. Now, all of these topics can be a 2-hour session in and of themselves, so we won't get into it too much. But starting to think about how can you take the first step towards building a more secure product? What are the things that you need to start thinking about? Should you at least train your employees, have them read, for instance, the OWASP guidelines? Or should you focus on vulnerabilities, right? So focus on training, securing, automating, and monitoring products. But of course, products are only half of the battle. If you're a product company, that's great. If you're just a regular organization that doesn't have a product, doesn't have a digital product, that you also need to focus on securing your organization. And that's through something called an ISMS, an Information Security Management System. What assets do you have at your disposals? Computers, servers, domain names, and then find the risk associated to those different assets and figure out a structured way to remediate those risks. Again, ISMS, huge topic, which we won't get into today, but this is just a little teaser to get you thinking about how you can basically secure your organization. And increasingly in the Canadian market and the American market, we're seeing different specializations emerge in cybersecurity to address both product security on one side and organizational security. Because the steps that you take to secure your internal network within your company, your Wi-Fi, may not be the same steps that you take to secure a SaaS platform or a product that you're offering online. So these are kind of separate disciplines that operate in parallel, equally important in my humble perspective. And then basically figure out, everyone's clear-headed when things are going well. And now is the perfect time to figure out what are you going to do in the event that you do get breached. Because that's how you ensure that people are prepared, trained, and level-headed. If there's a security incident, the last thing you want to do is have someone who's in a state of panic because they're potentially suffering a breach, making rash and quick decisions on how to address it. I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed out, I don't make the best decisions. So it's really important to prepare an incident response plan. How do you detect an incident? How do you respond to an incident? How do you communicate to an incident? Do you reach out to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's information crimes division? Do you reach out to your customers? Who within your organization gets notified? Is it the CIO? Is it the CEO? Is it everyone, right? These are the sorts of things that should just be automatic so that people don't hesitate when they're in a moment of crisis on how to take next steps. And then business continuity and disaster recovery. Again, if ever this does happen, which again, I'm hoping on no one here, but it's part of doing business in Canada, unfortunately. How do you respond to this to ensure that you can continue operating your business properly? So do you have a backup ready to go? Do you have a plan to migrate away from your current infrastructure or your office? All of this heavily depends on your business, but starting to plan out a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan in the early stages of your growth becomes invaluable, because that's when those plans get developed, right? It's not in the moments of crisis when everyone's putting out fires that you have to start figuring out what the next steps are. And then practice, right? Train and practice so that everyone knows what to do in the case of an emergency, just like you do for fire drills. In Canada, when you open up your office, if you already have an office, you'll periodically hear the fire bells go off. And the fire bells in the office aren't because there's a fire. It's because everyone has to do what they plan to make sure that everyone knows what they should be doing. So you exit the building in an orderly fashion and you check off boxes at the end. So BCP, DRP, business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response, exactly the same thing. Practice, practice, practice. Now the good stuff. So we talked about all the negative things that can happen, which is, an important thing to know. But there's also a lot of positives. So as we discussed earlier, Canadian consumers are hyper aware of security, especially in light of what's been happening in the 2 last years with large organizations within Canada. And there are ways, if you're investing in security already, because you want to reduce your risk, reduce your financial exposure, then the best thing that you can do is show that to your customer. Communicate it out to your customers so that they know that they're dealing with a mature player. And that in turn drives new business, which is very interesting, right? So once you start notifying your customers that you're investing in this, that process runs in parallel with getting some kind of security certificate. There's a number of certifications on the market. I'll focus on, let's say, 4 categories here. There's the ISO 27001. ISO is the International Standards Organization based in Geneva, Switzerland. They do a whole bunch of stuff, and they have a number of certification processes for security, so that when you get that, you can then show that to future partners or future customers, and they say, okay, we don't even need to audit you because we know that you've already been audited by ISO. And as you're dealing with large customers in Canada, this becomes increasingly important, because if you manage to get, for instance, a bank as a customer, or a large corporation as a customer, or even someone that's a little bit savvy as an individual customer, they're going to require you to go through tons of audits. And if you're already certified, you all of a sudden don't need to incur that cost every time you're signing a new customer. You could just hand them your certification and say, we've done it, we're covered, we're prepared, and move on to the more important business of signing new customers. So ISO 27001 for your ISMS, for your corporate IT and security. SOC 2 is a little bit more focused on your product. Canada, the Canadian government has just launched a certification program, I believe it was in 2020, specifically catered to small and medium businesses. So Canada Cybersecurity is a certification program offered by the government of Canada, and the government of Canada puts their stamp and says, this company is operating in a secure way. And if you're looking for people that can back you, credibility in the security space, having a government institute certifying your security can be a really powerful force in inspiring trust in your customers. And then, depending on which industry you're operating in, there are industry-specific security certifications. So a very common example is the payment card industry, which is Visa, MasterCard, American Express. I think PayPal's in the PCI now too. They offer a specific security certification if you're dealing with credit card information called the PCI DSS. And there are similar certificates for every industry that you enter, which may help you acquire new business, but may also just be a straight up requirement for operating in that space. If you're transacting customer data, credit card data in Canada, you need to have some kind of PCI DSS certification. So this can not only help you do business, but it can also greatly reduce the overhead for outsourcing analysis and security audits from your future customers. And then when you go and you want to get cyber liability insurance, you go to an insurance provider, you say, hey, I might get breached. Could you offer me insurance if I get breached so that you can refund me? When you have these certifications, that cost, the premium for your insurance, for your cyber liability insurance, is going to be greatly lowered as well, which is a nice cost savings. And here we can break down all of the different measures. So when we're talking about minimizing the cost of a breach, it's 1,000 little things that you do. So we talked about incident response. Incident response testing lowered the average cost of a breach for global companies by $300,000. So those companies that had an incident response process defined when they were level-headed, had a good coffee, and had adequately tested it and were ready, were able to save $300,000 when they did get breached. Business continuity planning, how to basically make sure that your business stays online after you've suffered something like this, that's another $270,000 in savings. Formation of an incident response team, a dedicated cybersecurity team that focuses on responding to these incidents. Another saving, and another, and another, and another. So you can see that bit by bit, it's one step at a time that you minimize these impacts, and you ensure basically that regardless of the circumstances, you remain online and healthy. And another thing is the majority of companies out there, especially in the SMB space, do not have a lot of this stuff. So when you're looking at the numbers for small and medium businesses in Canada and you're saying, wow, $2 million US if I get breached, I can't afford that. Well, those are companies that did not have these things in place, right? So by being a little bit more proactive and starting to pick away at this problem, you can ensure that you really minimize that cost and you don't end up being in a situation where you're expanding into a thriving business market and all of a sudden you're set a step back, right? So just to hammer the point home one more time, don't be afraid to take action. This is a very broad topic with a lot of different subtopics and a lot to think about. But the journey to a secure organization begins with one implementation, one control, taking your first step towards that. And every step that you take is a step in the right direction, is decreased cost if this ever happens, is increased trust in your customers, is insurance that you'll be able to get certified and deal with large organizations in Canada, acquire a larger customer base. Every step that you take is a step in the right direction. So oftentimes people look at, cybersecurity, it feels so abstract, and sometimes the controls being put in place can be so numerous that it really prevents people from even starting to have that conversation, starting to have that thought process, starting to take those steps. And I really want to hammer home that, it all starts with one conversation. So there's no better time to start thinking about these things than now as you're building up your Canadian operations. That's it. That was a lot of talking. So that's my conversation. Does anyone have any questions? The lack of questions can either be a very good sign or a very bad sign. I don't know how to interpret it.
I have one, Nate. Victor here. So based on all the information that you just provide, what will be your advice for a small company that is trying to get into the Canadian market for make that cyber secure, I don't know, company or project, just getting like for the first time? Like what will be that first step, like getting an insurance, or what will be the most recommended?
Really good question, Victor. The most recommended step is the one that is going to cost you the less and save you the most. And you can see on the breakdown of costs associated to a breach, the single most impactful thing that you can do is incident response testing. What do you do if you get breached? Having a plan and testing that plan. And that doesn't require specialized knowledge, expertise, outside experts. That's something that your team can do by themselves because they know your organization. They know your product if you're offering a product. So first step should always be incident response testing because that's low cost, very, very high impact. Does that answer your question, Victor?
Yes, but it brings another one. So, for example, if I have a customer that has some valuable information about his clients, it's an insurance enough to provide and to sign an NDA and to get a business with him? Like it's enough for warranty for him, or should I get something else? Like show him that I'm taking more precautions in my security for the development?
That's a good question. So is an NDA enough when signing a customer that has sensitive data? It really depends on the customer. So an NDA, all you're doing with an NDA is you're saying, I promise not to tell anyone else. NDAs are very difficult to enforce legally. So typically an NDA is not enforceable in court. It's really a gentleman's agreement, which people take very seriously and stick to in Canada, right? So when you sign an NDA, you're saying, I'm not going to share this with anyone else. Really important first step. Then it depends on who the other organization is. If you're doing business with BMO, they're not even going to talk to you if you don't have security measures in place. They're not even going to look at you. If you're doing business with maybe a smaller organization like a local grocery store, or a local antique store, like there are so many on Notre Dame Street in Montreal, they may not have any security. An NDA.
Nate?
Yes, I seem to have cut out there.
Yes. Yes,
Where
you
did-
cut off a little bit.
Where did you
But-
lose me?
Just a few seconds, so you can continue. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
About the small companies in Montreal.
There you go. So it really depends on who your company, your counterpart is. I would say that an NDA is a necessary step, and then if you want to deal with more mature players, you're going to need to have some kind of security assurances to put them at ease and make them comfortable with dealing with you.
I have a question for you. Going back to your certifications slide, is it worth it to get certified, like by entering the Canadian market? Like, is this like a possible also first step, or who would you recommend to get certified?
That's again a very good question. So there's two sides of that question. I think pursuing a certification gives you a structured and orderly way to secure your organization and minimize your risk exposure. So if you're looking to minimize risk, these certifications are going to be a template of things to do. And when you're first approaching this topic, it can be very helpful to say, okay, here are the 20 things that I need to do in order to be ISO 27001, or here are the 7 categories that I need to listen to be PCI DSS certified. So that's one side of the question. The second side of the question is, for which companies do certificates result in a net increase in revenue, right? So there's minimizing risk and minimizing loss. I think that's very important. And then there's increasing revenue. And increasing revenue, it would, again, typically be more appropriate if you're planning on dealing with large customers. So large customers are going to have standardized outsourcing analysis, and they're going to send you a whole bunch of questions when you want to sign them on. Regardless of the industry, all large Canadian companies are going to hammer you with questions when they want to bring you on board. And these certificates are going to dramatically reduce the cost of answering all of those questions, and also ensure that there's a high degree of trust in the product and services that you're offering. So certificates can be pursued by everyone if they're looking to reduce costs, but should definitely be pursued by people that are looking to deal with large, typically institutional players in the Canadian market. Does that answer your question, Vivi?
It does.
Any more questions?
Yes, I'm sorry, I do have one. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nate, based on your experience and your knowledge, take some advance. So for your recommendation, for example, for a new programmers, yeah, do you think there is a checklist or something that we have to put attention when we start coding for implement all the security, or at least make them not too how can I say it, easy to hack or easy to break the security?
Totally, great question. So we're touching on the SSDLC topic, the secure software development. What you want to do is basically, with all of these security measures, you want to minimize your overhead, right? You don't want to be doing these very extensive, complicated manual processes that involve a lot of money to uphold. You want to make things clean, simple, automated, so that all of your developers can build and write secure code, and then you don't have to worry about too many product vulnerabilities. And the most efficient way to do that, we're getting a little bit niche into software development, but to answer your questions, there's 2 categories of automation tools that are very useful here. The first one is called static testing. Let me write it, static application security testing. And the second one is dynamic application security testing. DAST and SAST. So if you're building software, you have these tools called SAST, static testing, that scan all of your code and say, here's a vulnerability that you need to address. And what you could do is you could basically run all of your software through this every time it's developed, so that automatically, if a developer writes a vulnerability into your code, it gets flagged, and that developer has to address that vulnerability. So that's on the static side. Just looks at code and says, here are some vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. And that's a really good first step towards securing the software that you're writing. And then you have dynamic application security testing, DAST. So dynamic application security testing is an automated suite of services that runs after your software has been deployed by simulating attacker behavior. So you basically develop code, you run these static tools against them, these static analysis tools, and then you deploy your code, and then you run the dynamic application security testing tools. And those two in combination will identify probably 90% of the vulnerabilities that you're going to introduce in your code. And implementing this in an automated fashion, something called a DevSecOps pipeline, is going to basically allow you to write code very quickly and minimize the amount of vulnerabilities that you have in it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. That was great, actually. Yeah, I was about to ask Charlie in the future to help me to test my software.
Well, nothing substitutes manual testing. So having external pen tests is great. It's pretty much a necessity at some point, but you want to catch those low-hanging fruit. You don't want to pay someone from outside. A lot of these security guys, this is what they do, right? You say, here's my product. Can you test my product? They come in, they run these static and dynamic tools, and then they charge you for it. Something you could have done for free. It's something you could do yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Nate, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we will provide development services, what is your advice? So we are offering nearshoring or something.
Good question. So my advice on which topic? On the software development portion or on entering the market in general?
In security part.
So if you're offering nearshoring services for product development, the main risk associated to nearshoring from a security perspective is people introducing vulnerabilities into your software. Or obviously having untrusted third-party software, as Charlie points out, having untrusted dependencies. So again, I would reinforce this notion of an SSDLC. If you could show a level of maturity and have an automated process that identifies vulnerabilities in your developer's code and ensures that they're not being delivered to the client, that's already going to deliver some level of trust. And for nearshoring specifically, because it tends to be viewed as a high-risk, high-reward industry for Canadian vendors, people go nearshoring because salaries are extremely competitive, but also understand that there are some security issues with going nearshore. So if you can get one of those certifications that we talked about before, that's definitely going to bolster your marketability within the Canadian market, because you'll be able to say, look, I'm not just building software, but here are some third parties that have audited the way we do things, and that can guarantee that we have minimum standards in place for the software development process. Which certificate really depends on your business. If you're doing nearshoring, ISO 27001 would probably be a good choice. And then really focusing on that SSDLC, specifically automated vulnerability identification. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Nick. Yes, thank you.
Charlie has his hand raised. Charlie, do you have any questions?
Yeah, good morning. So
Good morning.
My question is the following, because imagine that we are building houses. It's not like I'm building my own house. If I'm building my own house, then I can invest on some very heavy and special security systems that I can implement all of them in my house. But if I am building houses for everybody and I just want to know exactly like the minimum requirements to put on the houses that I am building, not to charge it as a separate service, but just to make it just a safe house. Like, okay, there is this certification that will teach you that every house needs to have a door, and the door needs to have a lock, and the windows also need to be locked. And if you do that, then the house is minimally safe. Is there a certification like that that we can take? Because we are not building our own house, we are building different kinds of houses for different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, Charlie. I'm glad we're having this conversation now before you log off and go do whatever you're going to do after you log off. So what's the most one-size-fits-all certificate in this long list of certificates that I've given, right? What's the one that's like the most versatile? Well, Canada Cybersecure really just focused on the Canadian market. So if you're expanding outside of the Canadian market, people won't really have insight into that. They don't really understand what the product is. It's only starting to gain traction within the Canadian market. So that's not going to be for you. Industry-specific certifications, forget about it. If you're a one-size-fits-all shop, you don't need to prove that you're handling credit card data with care, because that's only one of 100 things that you're going to be doing. So 100 different certificates are going to get you nowhere other than in debt for all these security services you're going to have to pay for. The most common universal standard is ISO 27001. That just says, here is how we deal with our enterprise security. Here is how we basically ensure that our computers, our servers are secure and well developed. So ISO 27001 is probably the most common and definitely the most versatile security certification if you're looking to be a versatile organization.
Yes, I guess what I am wondering is because we build a bunch of software, most of them have like input fields, for example, and with SQL injection, the hackers like to use the input fields to see if they can get data out of the database or something like that. If there is a certification that can teach you quickly how to make at least all of the input fields in your software like hacker proof, and then you can implement that to all of the software that you make, either if it is for schools or for hospitals or for a bank, then is there like because what I understand by ISO is like more of documents that you read, that you have written down, but I am not sure if those come with techniques that developers can implement on a daily basis. Every time they put an input field on any software, then they just know that they have this certain, they have to follow these steps to make that input field secure. Is there like a certification for that, or is the ISO enough, or is it going to teach me that?
So you're very correct that the ISO is focused on organizational processes and the organization specifically. And when you're describing application development, well, that's a whole different class, right? Your clients aren't necessarily going to care that your Wi-Fi at your business is very secure. They're going to focus on some of the vulnerabilities that you identified. So for application security, when you're talking about a certification, are you talking about a certification for developers or for organizations?
Yeah, I don't really need the certification. I need the knowledge. If there is a course or a tutorial or a website or an organization out there teaching those kinds of basic things to developers, I want my developers to go through that, even if they don't get certified. Because sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that if I get a certification for the organization, that's not going to prevent the hackers to get into the software of my clients if we didn't build them correctly. So I would rather that software being built correctly than having the certification.
Yeah, totally. And you're 100% right on that one for application development. So I'll give you the very obvious answer first, which I'm sure you're already aware of. But can you see this new screen I just pulled out, or no?
Yes, secure your product SSDLC.
Oh, no, that's not the one I was trying to share. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, either way, I'll post a link in the chat. So I'm sure you're already aware of this, but there's an organization called OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, which publishes a top 10 most common vulnerabilities every couple of years. These are the vulnerabilities that impact software, web software specifically, and that based on the ranking of how common they are. SQL injection is one of them. It's been decreasing in frequency, but there's a whole bunch of them, right? Injection attacks, broken authentication, deserialization, all these different categories of vulnerabilities. It doesn't really matter for the sake of this conversation, but that's your first tool. OWASP Top 10, honestly, every developer should know it by heart, or at least understand, not necessarily the ranking, but understand every one of those. And then to secure the web applications that you're doing, it's your SSDLC. It's basically get your OWASP, train your developers on how to develop software based on this OWASP, and then test it and give a continuous feedback cycle to your developers based on these automated tools, right? So in our organization, for instance, the pipeline I built out, when someone commits code, they can commit code as much as they want to a branch. When they want to merge it into master, again, I'm getting very technical, but only for a very short window of time. These checks run and say, this code is good, this code is not good. If it's not good, then we have a conversation. And then if it's good, it gets merged in, it gets deployed. After it gets deployed, automatically, more tools run and say, here are some problems with your code. And specifically for the category of vulnerability you're describing, like SQL injection is a rather dated category of vulnerabilities, which, because it's so easy to detect. So training, detection, and continuous feedback cycles for your developers are key. I know we talked about a lot of things, but I'm trying to keep it as concise as possible.
Yeah, no, this is very useful. This is very useful. Thank you.
Okay. If I might chip in into this conversation, so I would suggest a few things, right? So first, it's the way you start writing secure software goes from your designer architect role downwards. So make sure that role it's the one that is getting trained, prepared, and is researching how to build secure software. Second, you can Google pretty quickly best practices and ideas on how to write secure software, because like Nate is saying, there are generic and general guidelines, but also you need to know how to apply them to your specific technology stack. Whether you're building a mobile app, is going to be a little bit different from writing an API, from writing a web app application or a desktop application. And lastly, a way to really hack the process of getting the knowledge quickly enough is if you research these automated tools that Nate was mentioning and what are the tests that they run, you will be able to infer and reverse engineer what are they targeting and therefore how to protect yourself. And why do I say you this? We went to this process with one of the proof of concepts that I wrote with my team. And we just got a report from one of those penetration tests. And that report example showed us what they were testing. And then with that, we just created a best practice guideline for our team. And from that moment on, for that tool, we got 100% pass on penetration tests. So I think it's a very good question. And of course, since we have individuals and organizations from different markets and businesses, we can have this conversation and note it down, and maybe not in the scope of the ProColombia conversation, but maybe later on we can if there is a good sample set of individuals that are interested on this, we can for sure figure out a way to help you and guide you guys into a good best practice on how to write secure software.
Totally, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
And the last thing I'll add on this topic, I love talking about secure software, so I have to hold myself back from just rambling on this. So I apologize in advance to everyone who's sitting here not developing web software. But there's an organization called Offensive Security, which is a golden standard for individual security certificates for developers and software managers and stuff like that. They just released a new course specifically for certifying secure software development for web applications. I don't have the certificate yet because it's still very fresh, and I had to keep my CISSP up to date. But I've heard really, really good things. So that might be a good resource, a little bit expensive to get people certified. But the course material that would be free on YouTube, for instance, might be a really good place to start for training programs.
I'm sorry, can you put
Thanks a lot.
or the name in the chat?
Sure, yeah. Any other questions while I track that down?
Oh, Nate, can you stop sharing for a second, and and that way I can put the satisfaction poll while we finish up. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, there he is.
Yeah.
All right. Please answer.
I would say while the poll results are coming in, thank you all very much for having me and listening through this. I know we covered a wide breadth of topic, but it was a great bit of fun talking to you all, and thanks for the great questions as well.
Nate, personally, I really
Thank you very much, Nate,
thank you for everything you have to say.
help.
Yeah.
Can we add you on LinkedIn?
Of course, yeah, it's LinkedIn. My last name is Toombs, so it's just Toombs. I get very excited talking about security, so anytime you need someone to talk to, don't hesitate.
For the Tom's rules.
All right. So my second question is, tell us what are the topics that we haven't covered so far yet in our modules that that you would like us to cover. We have a few modules coming up, so. All right, some topics here. IP focus on intangible assets. Okay. How to learn how to hack.
I think Charlie's still thinking about that professional reconversion after the first part of that presentation.
That's right. All right, so with that, I'm gonna stop sharing. Thank you all for replying the questions. And I appreciate you joining today. Thank you, Nathaniel, for the cybersecurity. Thank you, Juan, for the running the operations. If you have any questions, you can reach us through email or Slack. And as Charlie says, let's pivot. No, Juan, no, I'm not moving to hacking. All right, everybody.
Nate, thanks a lot. Juan, same. Great session. Have a good day.
Have a good day,
Cheers,
everybody.
everyone.
Vivian,
guys.
thank you very much. The guys